Hey everyone, this is Scott from certmedia.com, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to set up Cloudflare Pro for your WordPress website. Cloudflare Pro comes with some added benefits over its free version, and some of these are actually quite good. I'm not going to be addressing whether you should upgrade to it in this video. I'll make a separate video on that topic of who it's for and why you should upgrade to it. But in this video, we're going to assume you already have it, and we're going to walk through the new features that you gain access to, and I'm going to show you how to set them up. So a couple things of note. There are no new options in any of the first 5 tabs: Overview, Analytics, DNS, Spectrum, or SSL, and TLS. All of the cool new stuff begins in the Firewall section. So in the Firewall, because you're now in the Pro plan, you gain access to the Web Application Firewall. This is very similar to like running WordFence. It is a firewall that is supposed to protect against known vulnerabilities both against not only WordPress, but PHP and your server-side software that you may be running. So to start, you need to first turn on the Web Application Firewall. Once you do this, you'll then have access to the Cloudflare Managed Rule Set. These are rules that Cloudflare enables and disables, and you can choose which ones you need depending on your application. So for instance, since you're on a WordPress website, you do not need to enable the Drupal specific rule set, and it's actually recommended that you don't. You can leave the Adobe Flash Player rule set enabled, even if the domain does not currently use Adobe Flash, because really it's going away in a couple of years anyways, and it's on life support as it is. The ones that I begin to change though is the Cloudflare miscellaneous settings. I do actually enable these rule sets. And what's interesting is if you click the name of the rule set, you can view the rules and what it protects against. So various rules, Apache Tomcat, Apache Struts, the Practico CMS. There are a bunch of random rule sets, including from Microsoft ASP.NET in here, that it will protect your website against. What's also cool is if you enable the rule set, you can choose what to do when a traffic pattern matches the specific vulnerability. Honestly, what I typically do is I just leave it at the default. Their defaults are really solid as is. Then you have to enable the Cloudflare PHP rule set because WordPress is built and runs on PHP. Really, I wouldn't worry about it too much, and I would just make sure that these are enabled. Then you get Cloudflare Special, which are for a unique, very specific niche attacks. If you're using WHMCS, which is when you're using like a technology to allow people on your WordPress website to register domains or cPanel accounts, you'll know if you're using this because you're typically operating either as a reseller or you're offering a hosting service. Then you'll want to enable this rule set. For most of you, you don't need to enable this rule set. And then make sure, and it should be enabled by default, to make sure the Cloudflare WordPress rules are enabled. And this is where a lot of the known plugin vulnerabilities are found. So it'll warn you and block various common rule threats. It's a pretty effective service. And what's great is once you enable it, you do get these rule sets and their blocks detected in the Cloudflare firewall status. So in the overview, it will list out whether something has been blocked and it follows under a specific pattern found in the Cloudflare rule set. You can enable the OWASP mod security rule set. So this is a very difficult rule set. On some websites, I have seen some false positives come up. So my typical advice is you set it to a low sensitivity, because sometimes if you enable the OWASP rules, you will get false positives. And if you're running any sites, particularly WooCommerce, I would make sure to test this. Maybe run it on an off-peak traffic period to make sure that everything still functions as normal. However, if you have it on low sensitivity, this should avoid most of your issues. And you can either set the action to challenge, which is when it'll be given a CAPTCHA and a little screen that says you need to verify that you're not a bot, and they click that, and then it will allow the transaction to go through. And also make sure that the OWASP comment exceptions are also enabled. And these are exceptions in here for Gutenberg, notably for WordPress, because there were a time when these rule sets were causing issues with Gutenberg. So just make sure that the common exceptions are on. You set it to low sensitivity, maybe medium, and then that your action is set to challenge, so that way in case something is a false positive, they can get themselves through. A bot should not get through it. The challenge screen, they most of the time just bail on the request once they're met with the challenge screen because they cannot fill it out. That's really all there is majorly in the firewall rules. You do gain access to more firewall rules, so you can set up additional rules for your website. Instead of 5, you gain access to 20. The tools section is virtually the same. You can block by user agents. You can use zone lockdown features to lock down a URL to a specific subset of IP addresses. You can always use the IP access rules, same as usual, and everything else is exactly the same. Cloudflare Access is another service and is not included, so we're going to skip it. Under the performance section, though, you do gain some useful features, and these features I really want to talk about. You gain access to Cloudflare Polish. Polish is basically the equivalent of short pixel adaptive images, but without the resizing functionality. What it will do is if you have an image on your website and you're serving it from your domain, you can choose on Polish to enable lossless or lossy compression. My recommendation is always set it to lossy. Even in lossy compression on very high traffic photography websites, I haven't noticed any noticeable degradation in image quality. Furthermore, even if it is, you can just purge the Cloudflare cache because it's not going to be compressing the images on your server. So my typical recommendation for this setup is, on your WordPress site, install UImage Optimizer or some plugin to losslessly compress your images. That way there is no image quality loss. And then if you're on Cloudflare Pro, enable lossy compression with WebP. This will automatically convert all of your images to WebP and serve them to the browsers that support it, while also serving them with lossy compression. This can greatly reduce your file size. And the great thing is once again, you're not actually storing those WebP images on your server. And if your images are not looking good after the lossy compression, which I've never noticed, you can just purge the Cloudflare cache and set it back to lossless, and it will look exactly the way it did before. This right here is probably my favorite feature, especially when you're working on a website at scale or on very large e-commerce installs. Because on WooCommerce in particular, there are a ton of thumbnails generated. And on very large stores, lossy compression would either have to be done on an expensive service like ShortPixel or Imagify, where you're going to be spending a ton of money just to get the images compressed, when you can just use Cloudflare to do your lossy compression, use a free plugin to do your lossless compression, and you're honestly getting the best of both worlds. The only thing you need to be careful of is, because of the way Cloudflare works, is if you're on a low traffic site and you just installed this, the first time you load the page, the images will not be compressed. The reason for this is it's probably going to result in a cache status miss, so the resource is not going to hit the Cloudflare cache. On the second test, if you're running it through GT Matrix, for instance, or PageSpeed Insights, then you're going to get the WebP images as you would expect. And it honestly works. I've used it a ton, and I highly recommend that if you're on this plan, just use this feature. It is very, very solid. Otherwise, you get the enhanced HTTP2 prioritization. What this does, and it's kind of silly for some of the browsers, but as it mentions here, HTTP2 sets a priority for different types of assets that are being served to the browser. They have a blog post that goes into it, but certain browsers prioritize different resources at different times. So for instance, a low priority resource could probably be something like a web font, for instance. This will fix the prioritization in browsers that are common, it's Safari. It's always Safari. Fundamentally, Safari has some weird prioritization practices in HTTP2, and this helps to fix it. It also does Edge and I think Internet Explorer, but none of those browsers matter because most of you who probably are designing your websites are doing it on a Mac or an iPhone. I'm probably the only one that doesn't, and you're going to want to have an optimized experience for your type of audience, especially depending on your clientele. If you're trying to target a upper middle class plus audience in the United States, then most of them are probably going to be using an iOS device that's running Safari, and then they're probably using a MacBook, which is also using Safari. So just go ahead and enable HTTP prioritization, and you should see a faster experience, and it should be more consistent than as if you were using Chrome on Windows. Google Chrome honestly does have the best performance of any realistic browser, in my opinion, and this does help fix that. And then TCP Turbo will reduce the latency and throughput with custom TCP optimizations. It just delivers the assets even faster than before. It reduces the latency that takes the app for assets to get delivered through the browser. It's a great feature. It's a noticeable improvement, but I wouldn't go getting Cloudflare Pro for this feature. You're much better off getting it for the Firewall and the Polish feature. Under the Mirage feature, it basically functions as a lazy load, but specifically tailored to mobile devices on slow connections. This is actually a really cool feature. And I had to explain how this works a little bit. Now, Mirage gives you a little explanation here. It says it lazy loads the images, but it does something a little different. So instead of just loading a blank background like you see in WordPress Rocket, it will get a very low resolution quality of your image. And I mean very low, basically to where it's just grainy completely. And then it loads it in progressively. This is in theory a better user experience for slower devices because it shows that the image quality is getting better, which is a better progress indicator than a blank screen that then pops the image into existence. This is actually really interesting to use if you've ever tested your mobile device on a 3G connection, and it does make a noticeable improvement. The great thing too is that it also works with third-party images, and it prioritizes images that are in the viewport of the browser. So images it'll lazy load every image progressively. The images in the viewport though are going to be downloaded first. So like if you go to my website, or I'll open it up for you. When you're visiting my website, the images in viewport would probably be the logo and this background image right here. These are the images that would then be progressively loaded in immediately. And it's just like the lazy loading tech I already have on there, but it's a low res image, so it renders and feels a lot more natural than the image just popping into existence. It's actually a really cool feature if you do ever get the chance to try it. Now, I will note that under certain conditions, I have noticed client sites who, when they enable this feature, sometimes, and it's typically the weirder themes that they have on ThemeForest, the images will not render in properly. And it's typically because they have a lazy load plugin installed, and then whatever JS library they're using for their image output, they're conflicting. You can exclude an image from Mirage, but oftentimes it's easier to just disable lazy loading. And while Mirage does say it's a beta feature, it's been in beta for years, and honestly, you're totally fine using it. The Rocket Loader has been in beta forever too, and I always use that. So we'll turn it on. That's about all you do get in the optimization section. The caching section is exactly the same as it's always been. The worker section is the same. You do get 20 page rules instead of 5. So I do recommend that you check that out if you can. It allows you to have a lot more flexibility in how you're optimizing your assets. When you only get 3 as your default, you're not allowed to do a lot of in-depth optimizations. So let's say you wanted to use Cloudflare to cache your HTML, that's one of your page rules, but then you need a second page rule to exclude your WordPress login URL. And then if you wanted to cache your JSON request, well, that's 3 and you're out. But I could still think of times when you'd want your videos to be cached. There could be certain pages you need to exclude from it, and you just get into that kind of loop of you need extra page rules and you kind of run out. So Cloudflare Pro does provide you with more. The traffic section is Argo, as I mentioned in the free video. It's not changed. The stream section is not changed. The custom pages does actually allow you to customize the pages, which is awesome. This allows you to style your pages to fit your brand a little bit better. So let's see if I can style something easily. So let's just go to the WAF challenge page. So you can, first of all, you could give the address of a customized URL. So what you do in here is you declare the URL of the page that you want to be served. You can build your custom page, and then Cloudflare will serve it to the user. The only thing that you need to do is include the following token here for this specific page. And if you click preview default, it'll show you what it looks like by default. In fact, for those of you who may not know, Cloudways, who is my web host, actually does use this, and they, on their login URL, they screen all traffic using the I'm under attack mode, and then they have it as a customized page so that way it fits their branding. It took me a while to realize it because it normally only takes a couple seconds for the page to come up and then disappear. But when I was go on Cloudways, I'm like, wait a minute, that looks just like Cloudflare's I'm under attack page, and they stylized it a little bit to not look like a Cloudflare page, and it looked very good. So if you're on a more business-esque website, this would be a very good thing to implement because it allows you to have your error pages to be more on brand instead of the Cloudflare brand. And I'm glad that they do include this in the pro version instead of the business version. The only thing you need to keep in mind is that the only thing you can't change is the origin error pages, which is the 502 and 504 errors. But otherwise, it looks great. So that's really all there is included in Cloudflare Pro. You basically get a couple more optimization features. You get the polish feature, which is just amazing from my experience. You get the Mirage feature, which is cool and very useful when you're optimizing for PageSpeed Insights, because PageSpeed Insights does use a 3G mobile connection, and those two features alone will solve a lot of your PageSpeed Insights issues. And then you get access to the web application firewall. In all honesty, I always say that the one thing I wish to see is Cloudflare and WordFence either team up or Cloudflare acquire WordFence, because you could get a ton of extra optimizations for the firewall added on their end, but I doubt we'll see that ever happen. If you have any questions about Cloudflare Pro, I'm able to answer them. Please feel free to ask in the comments below. Otherwise, make sure to stay tuned for the other video, which will go over whether or not you should upgrade to Cloudflare Pro and who it's really targeted for. Otherwise, make sure to like, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.